Hey there, English speakers, Jesse here. And today is part 2 of our study of Ashton Kutcher's speech in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Commission in the United States. You remember he's fighting, or he's asking for support for his program to fight human trafficking. Remember? It was a powerful, powerful speech. And in this part 2 of the speech, we're going to break down expressions and vocabulary that he uses that will help you understand and be able to use them to speak more fluently. And we're also going to look at his structure. He has a very specific structure. He prepared his presentation very well. He prepared it so it follows a flow. It follows a story. A flow. A flow is like if you picture a river, and the river, it kind of goes like that. The water goes like this downstream. The water flows. If you turn on a faucet or a tap, the water flows. So you have the idea of movement smoothly. So he prepared his presentation very well, masterfully even. And I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to how to copy his format. So if you have to give any presentations really in English or your language, these tips should help you. So let's move on. Let's go back to the video and study Ashton Kutcher's speech.
We also are collecting data. We have KPIs. We actually understand that if we're delivering value, we increase our efforts in that area. If we're not delivering value, we shut it down.
Pause. He said here, we're delivering value. Deliver, it's another artistic, colorful way to say we're providing value. But we're delivering. Notice the use of vocabulary words he uses is very good with his words. Deliver value. Very powerful language.
And it's a quantifiable solution. One of my mentors told me, don't go after this issue if you can't come up with a quantifiable solution. We can quantify it, and we can make the work that we're doing and the initiatives that you put forth accountable. My second recommendation.
Pause. He uses the word quantifiable. That's the adjective of, so what's the verb? To quantify. To quantify. Something is quantifiable. You can quantify it. To quantify means that you can count the results. You can count what you're talking about. You can attach a number to it. So the temperature is quantifiable. If you say something like the weather, that's not really quantifiable. How's the weather? Oh, it's sunny. That's not quantifiable. It's hot. That's not quantifiable. It's 26 degrees. That's quantifiable. Let's continue.
Is to continue to foster these private-public partnerships. Spotlight was only enabled by the McCain Institution and the full support of Cindy McCain and a man that I find to be not only a war hero, but a hero to this issue, John McCain. It wasn't just created by them. There was extraordinary support from the private sector. Company Digital Reasoning out of Tennessee stepped up to the plate. They offered us effort. They offered us engineers. They offered us support and pro bono work.
He uses a term there, pro bono work. Pro bono, that's a professional term meaning free. They didn't charge money. If somebody does some work or some service pro bono, they don't charge for it. It's a formal way of saying free. Let's continue.
We've had the support of companies that oftentimes war with each other, from Google to Microsoft to AWS to Facebook. And some of our other technology initiatives include many, many other private companies. It's vital to our success. these private-public partnerships are the key.
Pause.
It's vital to our
It's vital to our success. It's vital to our success. Meaning it's more than just important. It's necessary for something. If something is vital to something, or vital for something, or vital to something, it's necessary. It's vital to our success. It's necessary for our success. Let's move on.
The third thing I'd like to highlight is the pipeline. You know, we sit at the intersection of discovery of these victims, but the pipeline in and the pipeline out are just as vital and just as important, and addressing them are just as...
Okay, stop. Another thing he says is the pipeline. The pipeline. So a pipeline literally is the tube that is underground, and it has something, water or oil or sewage or something. It's the tube that's underground. It's called a pipe that water goes through. It's called a pipe. So a pipeline is when water goes from the source to your house or to where it's used. So he's talking about here the pipeline of where they get the kids, instead of water, where they get the kids to go from the source to the trafficking destination. The pipeline. The pipeline. He's going to talk more about it. Let's watch.
Important. I'd like to highlight one thing in particular, that being the foster care system. There are 500,000 kids in foster care today. I was astonished to find out that 70% of the inmates in the prison across this country have touched the foster care system, and 80% of the people on death row were at some point in time exposed to the foster care system. 50% of these kids will not graduate high school, and 95% of them will not get a college degree.
The foster care system is something in the United States. It's similar to adoption. In fact, many cases it leads to adoption. It's where children who are unwanted, they're abandoned, or they're taken from their family because their family really isn't fit to watch them. They're on drugs or alcohol or really in bad condition, and it's not safe for the children to be there. So they're taken away or left, and they need people to care for them. So he's going to talk about how that is sometimes a bad situation. Sometimes it's a good situation. And I know people who have actually adopted from the foster care system. So the system in itself is not bad, because I know people who've used it for good, for very good, for building a family, a beautiful family. But that's the system that he's talking about.
But the most staggering statistic that I found was that foster care children are 4 times more likely to be exposed to sexual abuse. That's a breeding ground for trafficking. I promise you that's a breeding ground for trafficking.
Pause. Go back and notice how he uses numbers and percentages here. X% of these kids, or X% of something, and then explain what it is. X% of these kids will not graduate high school. X% of these kids will not graduate college or university. Then we'll also use X times more likely or X times less likely to, and then the verb. 4 times more likely to whatever. 6 times less likely to whatever. And he says that this foster care system is a breeding ground for. Breeding ground is how to make it grow. A breeding ground. To breed is when you breed animals, you put them together to have puppies or kittens, or so to make new life, to make new, to grow. A breeding ground for bacteria, a breeding ground for infection, a breeding ground for human trafficking. Let's listen.
But the most staggering statistic that I found was that foster care children are 4 times more likely to be exposed to sexual abuse. That's a breeding ground for trafficking. I promise you that's a breeding ground for trafficking. But the reason I looked at foster care is that it's a microcosm. It's a sample set that we have pretty extraordinary data around to date, even though we can't seem to fix it. It's a microcosm for what happens when displacement happens abroad as the unintended consequences of our actions or inactions in the rest of the world. When people are left out, when they're neglected, when they're not supported, and when they're not given the love that they need to grow, it becomes an incubator for trafficking. And this refugee crisis, if we want to be serious about ending slavery, we cannot ignore it, and we cannot ignore our support for this issue in that space, because otherwise we're going to deal with it for years to come. The outbound pipeline. There's just not enough beds. The bottom line is, once someone is exposed to this level of abuse, it's a mental health issue. And there aren't enough beds, there's not enough support, and we have to have the resources on the other side. Otherwise, the recidivism rates are through the roof. It's astonishing, because when Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met.
The term Maslow's hierarchy of needs, don't worry about that. Worry about the verb. Needs are being met. You meet needs. Well, needs is a noun, but needs are being met. You meet needs. Remember those together. You meet needs. Needs are being met. Let's listen.
It's astonishing, because when Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met, people resort to survival, and if this is their means of survival and the only source of love that they have in their life, that's what they go for. So we have to address the pipeline out, and we have to create support systems on the other end. It's not an entitlement. It's a demand to end slavery. My fourth and final recommendation is the bifurcation of sex trafficking and labor trafficking.
Pause. We've talked about sex trafficking, weapons trafficking, drugs trafficking. He talks about labor trafficking now. Labor is another word for work. So this is just workers in factories that are not being paid very well. They're stolen from their country and brought into a foreign country. Labor trafficking. Let's watch what he says.
They're both aberrations. They're both awful. They're both slavery, and they're both punitive, in fact. But the solution sets are highly differentiated. When you look at sex trafficking, a victim is most often present at the incident of commerce. And this provides an opportunity for drastic intervention. Whereas in labor trafficking, the victims are being hidden behind the manufacturers and the merchandisers.
Pause. He said they're being hidden in the manufacturers and the merchandisers. The manufacturers, where products are being made, the factories, and the merchandisers, where the products are being sold, the stores. Let's continue.
And it requires an entirely different set of legislation and proactivity and enforcement in order to shut it down. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric that's going on in the world right now about job creation in the United States. Well, if we want to create jobs in the United States, I would ask you to consider eliminating slavery from the pipelines of corporations. Because a lot of that slavery is happening abroad. And if we ask those corporations under extreme pressure that if you don't change it, you are going to be penalized. And if you don't clean up that pipeline, it's going to mean trouble. And they're forced with two decisions. They can either clean up the pipeline abroad, or they can move the jobs to the United States of America where they can be regulated and supported. Bringing jobs to America can be the consequence of doing the right thing, or it can be the consequence of doing the wrong thing. But that choice is up to you. Now, it's not lost on me, but
Pause. He says, it's not lost on me. It's not lost on me. It's not lost on me that. It's not lost on me. He says, it's not lost on me that it can have consequences, meaning I'm not missing that information. I've thought about that. It's not lost on me means I've thought about it, and I'm not missing it. It's not lost on me that. Go back and listen to that one more time.
Now, it's not lost on me that all of this disruption in our marketplaces is going to have economic backlash. Like, that is not lost on me at all. But I ask you, do you believe that Abraham Lincoln had to consider the economic backlash of shutting down the cotton fields in the South when he shut down slavery? Because I'm sure that weighed on his mind. You know, happiness can be given to no man. It must be earned. It must be earned through generosity and through purpose. But the right to pursue it, is every man's right. And I beg of you that if you give people the right to pursue it, what you may find in return is happiness for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so he talked at the end again. He brought the speech around. You see this speech, it was powerful and it was well organized. If you have to prepare a presentation or a speech, this is a fantastic organization of a speech. He brought it all the way around and finished with a similar kind of structure as how we started, and that's pursuing happiness. In part one, I discussed what pursuing something and why he said pursuing happiness. But what a great structure, what a powerful message, and using powerful and colorful words and expressions with purpose and intent. So it's a powerful video. Again, I'll put the link to the original video that I found this in the description box below. So you can, after you know these expressions and hear these expressions, you can watch the video by itself without interruption. But a powerful message, powerful words, good organization, and something to really follow. I hope you've learned something from these. You've picked up some good language and good expressions. Let me know if you have any questions or if you have videos you'd like to break down like this. I'm going to be doing more of these in this style, so let me know what you want to see. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.